I'd done Granite Ridge before, once, 2 summers earlier, when the wildflowers were wild and the trail was easy to follow. This time I was on a 3-day loop I'd planned on my own. Late summer, clear skies, the kind of thin Colorado air that makes your breaths feel small and loud. I like hiking alone. It's quiet in a different way than being alone at home. Out there, you have to be present. So I pack light, tuck a small pistol in an inside pocket out of habit, not because I expect trouble, but because I like the comfort of something familiar in the hard places. Day one went like the guidebook said. Marmots screamed from boulders, a pair of jays complained at a nearby stand of pines, and I rinsed a thermos with water that tasted like mineral and sky. Granite Ridge itself is mostly loose talus and exposed slabs, the sort of place where each step has a little negotiation with gravity. I remember thinking how clean everything looked. The stone, the distant valley like a postcard, and how small I felt, the way you only do when you are between the vast and the very close. The shift was small at first. I was halfway up the ridge, breathing the kind of hard breath that flattens your ears when I heard it, a crunching behind me. Not birds or wind, but the exact rhythm of someone's boots on loose rock. At first I assumed another hiker. It was midweek. There had to be someone else. I stopped and waited. The sound stopped too, mid-crunch, like a record paused at the edge of a beat. I looked back along the narrow trail, nothing. The ridge fell away to scrub, scattered boulders, and the occasional patch of alpine grass. No headlamp, no silhouette, no movement. I kept my pack on and resumed hiking, but the sound returned with the same steady cadence. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Always just behind me, never closing, never widening the gap. When the trail cut around the granite horn, the sound came from below. When the path skirted a clump of pines, the sound shifted to the left. It was always in a place that made sense for a walker. I tried to rationalize it. Wind, the echoing of my own steps on the slabs, a deer stepping on rocks. I told myself these things out loud because out loud sounds like a plan. The sun was getting lower. There's a soft, particular light at that hour that turns everything a little flatter and more serious. I decided to make camp earlier than planned on a small, flat pocket just off the main ridge, sheltered from the wind by an outcropping. Habit made me check the pistol, put it in the same place, the same pocket. My hands looked for small certainties. Zip, click, the familiar weight. I set up the tent, boiled water, and ate standing up because everything had an edge now, a sharpness that makes you hurry. That's when I heard rocks shifting above me. It wasn't the random cascade of loose gravel tumbling down the slope. It was the slow, deliberate sound of weight moving along the ridgeline. Close enough that my dinner spoon scraped against the pot and the sound didn't drown out the rhythm. I flashed my headlamp along the ridgeline. For a second, I thought I saw a silhouette framed by the sky, tall and thin and utterly still. Then the beam passed a momentarily empty shoulder of rock, and there was nothing. I chalked it up to imagination until I stepped out to pee and saw the prints. They were fresh, deep in the dust where the slope met that narrow shelf. Boot impressions, not animal tracks, the tread of a heavy soul, evenly spaced, walking toward my tent. The path of prints curved, sometimes following the ridge contour, sometimes cutting through scrub. But the last few led directly down and stopped at the lip of my little camping pocket. There were no prints leading away. I stood there with the moon lifting over the opposite ridge, silver on granite. I called out, my voice small, trying to make it casual. "Hey, anyone up there?" The sound of my own voice felt ridiculous. The reply was wind and the faint, far-off slap of a branch. No answer. I walked around the perimeter of my sight, and the prints surrounded me, leading to my tent, to the cooking area, even over rocks that would have been hard to cross with a pack. Whoever had come that close had moved with intimate knowledge of the place. I did the sensible things. I tightened every knot, checked every clip, ran a careful hand over my pack to make sure nothing had been tampered with. I made sure the tent zipper worked smoothly and zipped both layers. I slid my pistol into the pocket of my jacket and left it there, where I could feel its outline against my ribs. I ended up sitting awake, not because I thought someone would break in necessarily, but because the fact of the prints made the mountain smaller in a way I did not appreciate. The dark felt like a lid. The footsteps began that night around 1 in the morning. They were out there, moving in a slow circle, never more than 20 feet from the tent. Always the same measured, patient pace. They navigated the small ridge rim like someone walking a practiced route. Sometimes they stopped. At those moments, I felt the entire world hold its breath. The noise never accelerated, never shouted. There were no voices, no calls, no sound besides the footfall on stone, the occasional drip of meltwater from a nearby rock. I didn't sleep much. When I dozed, I convinced myself I was hearing them in the spaces between dream and wake, because that's where irrational things like footsteps can live. At some point, I stood and poked the tent with my headlamp, daring whoever was outside to show themselves. The beam picked out nothing but rock and scrub. The beam didn't catch a face. The beam caught no movement. The sounds kept tracing the same path like a ritual. I called softly through the tent. "I'm leaving at first light. If you want to say hi, do it now." The wind swallowed the words. Dawn came with thin blue light. I unzipped slow, like one of those people in movies who learns how wrong their life is through a single motion. The prints were everywhere. Fresh boot tracks mapped every inch of the pocket, crossed my cooking area, and stepped over the small ridge where I'd gone out to pee. The heel marks pressed right up to the tent flap and stopped. Nothing beyond. No sleeping bag outside, no discarded clothes. Nothing to show why the footsteps had come and returned to the ridge. My hand shook a little as I loaded my pack. Every shadow at that hour seemed like the belly of something watching. There were other trails down the mountain. I took one that peeled away from the ridge, a route that runs through tighter trees and deeper shade. I walked fast, head down, not wanting to look back. The sound of my own boots became an anchor. Crunch, crunch, sure and real. I didn't hear any footsteps fall in time with mine. I didn't want them to. Weeks later, I mentioned the ridge to a ranger in the small office at the trailhead while rehydrating a lunch. He was a man who had the look of someone who'd learned what the land meant by watching it longer than most. He nodded and said, as if we were talking about a trout run. Granite Ridge. We try to avoid that stretch now. It's easy to lose gear there, and the wind will play tricks on you. Folks don't keep to the path like they should. I pressed a little. There were prints right at my tent. Came toward me in the night. He didn't laugh. He put down his mug and looked at me like someone measuring the thickness of ice with a stick. "You sure?" he asked. "Yeah, clear like a boot. Came down off the ridge and stopped right at my sight." He rubbed his jaw and said quietly, "We had a guy go missing up there 2 years back. Went up alone and never came back. Searchers looked for weeks, never found him. Some of the volunteers say they hear someone walking that ridge at night. Not every night, not every week, but sometimes. People hear the steps when they camp alone. They say the sound stops when they stop." I left Granite Ridge with coffee cooling in my cup and a new rule. Don't hike alone where you can avoid it. For a while, I told myself that was enough. A rational, safe change. But months later, when I'm on a gravel parking lot or on a dirt path out behind the house, I catch myself listening. When I slow down, there's a brief, impossible expectation that something will stop walking behind me. A familiar pause, as if someone's footsteps had been matching mine all along, obedient to my pace. It's an echo I carry now, a small, patient fear. I still hike. I still sleep under canvas sometimes, but I avoid the long, thin ridgelines where the world can be both very small and very exposed. And every now and then, when I'm alone and the night is quiet, except for the tiny machinery of my own breath, I test the little theory that has taught me more than I wanted to know. I stop walking. I wait. And I listen to see whether the footsteps stop with me.
I remember the heat that day like a bruise you can still feel weeks later. The kind of dry, pressurized heat that makes the rock give off its own light. Alex and I had driven in late, the kind of impulsive plan that starts with, "We can still do the loop before sunset," and ends up feeling like a dare. We'd both done slick rock and washes before. Neither of us was new to the desert. Our packs were light, water, headlamps, a printed, hand-drawn map Alex had found on a forum, snacks, a multi-tool. I kept a small pistol in the side pocket of my pack out of habit more than fear. Rattlesnakes and the occasional loose dog were normal. We laughed about our optimism as the canyon cliffs dragged their long shadows across the sand. The first 6 miles were easy in that deceptive way the desert can be at the start. The kind of easy that convinces you it'll stay easy forever. We took pictures of the sun washing the sandstone in honey, joked about the shapes in the cliffs, and shaded our eyes while someone in the distance shouted at a raven. The trail became a wash, soft sand underfoot that muffled our steps. And I remember thinking how soundless the place was when you stopped talking. No traffic, no distant machinery, only your breath and the rubbing of nylon against nylon. Then the markers changed. At first it was small, a cairn tucked into the crook of a boulder, the kind of half-hearted stack people leave to say you're on the right path. The cairns grew more deliberate as we walked, larger, straighter, stones chosen and balanced with care. Some had small, flat rocks placed on top like little plates. One had a thin stick leaning against it. They didn't look random. They looked intentional, curated. We followed them because that's what you do in a place where paths are suggestions. There was a logic to it. Rock pile, then rock pile, then another rock pile. The sun was already leaning when we decided to take what the forum marked as a shortcut through a side canyon to shave off some miles. It was bold, maybe foolish, but people take shortcuts all the time. We were both used to trusting our feet. The canyon swallowed the light faster than we expected. Shadows climbed up the walls and pooled like ink. We noticed, first with a laugh, and then with the sort of slow tightening that comes before worry, that the cairns had grown close together. Where you expect a cairn every 100 yards, they were now 30 or 40 apart, sometimes close enough to see one while you were standing on the one before. The spacing felt off, like someone had been building a path specifically for someone who was close behind. When the light really began to fail, it was immediate and deep. The sun tipped behind a mesa, and the canyon became a silhouette of itself. Our headlamps made halos in the dust when we finally turned them on. The short-beamed, narrow cones of light picked out the canyon walls and the sand, but the angles were wrong. Everything looked flatter under artificial light. We should have turned back then. Instead, we kept following the little stacks of stones because they were there, because a path with markers feels like a decision you don't need to question. The dead end came with the kind of slow, sickening clarity that makes your stomach drop and your hands go cold. One minute, the canyon opened into a narrow bowl with a scrub of sage and a dry pool of pebbles. The next minute, there was a cliff that closed off like a drawn curtain. The last cairn we'd seen was toppled and scattered in the sand. Stones splayed like broken teeth. Alex swore softly, something between a curse and a laugh, the kind people do when they're trying to keep panic light. We headed uphill to see if there was some hidden notch, some escape we'd missed. My flashlight played over the rim and caught nothing but the hard edge of the sky. Then the rocks fell. It was small at first, a pebble, then a bigger one tapping the cliff. We both stopped, the sound swallowed by the canyon, but sharp enough to snap our nerves. "Hello?" Alex called up, feeling the air for an answer. Nothing came. Another rock hit, closer this time, and I saw the shadow of movement along the rim. A single silhouette pacing the top in slow, deliberate steps. The outline was human, taller than most, and carried something long, maybe a walking stick, maybe a rifle. The way it moved wasn't hurried. It was a slow, methodical gait, like someone walking a line they'd walked 1,000 times. We shouted up, the voice reverberating and coming back to us thinner. No answer. Then a stone dropped so close it kicked up a small spray of sand at our feet. Alex's lamp flicked. A loose battery, he said later, but his hands had gone steady rare now, like they were playing at being calm. We chose to backtrack, to follow our footprints. We tried to follow the map. We tried to find the wash we'd been in. The problem was that the cairns were not static. Where we remembered one stood, there was a different stack now, pointing another way or no stack at all. In one place, we saw the impression of where a cairn had clearly been disassembled, stones scattered as if someone had kicked at it in the dark. At other spots, new cairns had been added close to the ones we'd just left, as if someone had been walking ahead of us and rebuilding the trail behind the wrong direction, making a maze. At some point, in the kind of panicked circling that is elliptical and useless, Alex caught a flicker on the rim, metal glinting like a sliver of moonlight. He pointed, and I waved the beam. There was a figure there that blocked the sky for a moment, then it was gone. The sound of footsteps continued along the ridge above us, soft but present, like someone testing the edge of their world. The night stretched. We kept trying to use the stars to triangulate where we were, but canyon walls steal perspective and pretend the sky will lie to you. Our phones had the faintest single bar, and the map app behaved like a drunk, jittery and vague. We rationed water in our heads, not because we were out, because rationing makes a plan feel like progress. We didn't speak much. When we did, it was practical. What direction did the last cairn point? Which side of the boulder did the sun rise from? We both thought about the pistol in the side pocket of my pack. We both thought about what feeling unsafe in the desert feels like. Not cinematic or violent, but stupidly exposed. Eventually, by exhaustion more than skill, we recognized a rock formation that matched the top of the forum map. There was a notch we hadn't seen before, but now the path made sense again, like a sentence pieced together. We followed it like men following a faint thread out of a labyrinth. Our car was where we left it, headlights off, keys in the ignition like lazy punctuation. It was nearly midnight. We drove away without turning on the heater until we were well out of the park. At the ranger station the next morning, Alex spoke first. He described the cairns, the way they clustered, the toppled ones, the figure on the rim. The ranger listened with that look people get when they've been trained to weigh attention. Not alarmed, not dismissive, precisely calibrated. "We've had reports," he said quietly. "Someone's been out there building markers to mislead people." He didn't say it as accusation, more like a fact that had complicated the land. He's careful. He only does it when the light's low. Folks report being led deeper into canyons. He doesn't answer when you call. We haven't caught him. He's been real good at being there on those edges where direction blurs. We asked if the ranger had any idea who. He shrugged and said, "No face. Guy doesn't hang around in daylight near trailheads. Some volunteers think he's a loner who likes the company of confusion. Others say he's testing something. We don't know." He added, almost as an afterthought, "If you see cairns that look too deliberate at sunset, don't follow them. Turn back." That line, "Don't follow them," replayed in my head for weeks later when I walked at dusk near the river just to feel normal. Sometimes when the sunlight leans and the shadows begin to elongate, I count cairns I don't intend to follow. I'll pass a stack of stones in a park and check its spacing. My fingers unconsciously weigh the logic of their placement, because it turns out you can be trained after one night of being lost. We still laugh about the trip, but it's a thin laugh. There are things you learn that aren't about navigation. You learn that someone can change the map without you knowing, that another person can make a path for you to walk without your consent. I don't like being out at sunset anymore when I'm alone. If I'm approaching the rim of a canyon and the cairns start to look too perfect, I stop and count them, and I watch where they point. I leave the ones that are obvious and choose my own line. Sometimes, when the light is fading and the world looks like it could fold in on itself, I think about the person pacing the rim. I think about how easy it would be to stand up there with a walking stick and a metal glint watching the canyon chew on the last of the daylight and waiting to see which way strangers will go. And I remind myself of the ranger's quiet sentence: he only builds them when the sun's low enough that you can't tell direction anymore.
I used to volunteer with the Forest Service every fall, clearing brush, checking trail signs, the kind of work that pays mostly in quiet. The section I covered sat deep in northern Georgia, where the mountains start to fold into themselves and fog sticks low to the trees. There's an old fire tower up there, rusted, decommissioned decades ago. Locals still call it Ranger's Peak. On clear days, you can see the ridgeline stretch for miles, but most of the time it's fog, rain, or that dim light right before dusk. I first noticed the light 3 seasons ago. A small pulsing glow near the tower. Not bright, but steady. Too far to be a campfire, too constant to be lightning. I figured some teenagers had hiked up there, maybe playing around. By the 3rd day, it was still there. Same time every evening, right after sunset. Just a faint orange blink through the trees, like a lantern swaying. Curiosity gets to you in the woods. Silence amplifies every thought. One afternoon, I packed light. Just a flashlight, radio, and my small revolver, and followed the old service road up toward the tower. The air smelled like pine tar and wet earth, the kind of thick stillness that makes you talk to yourself to keep sane. Halfway up, I started seeing signs someone had been there recently. Footprints in the mud, a bent fence post, a small pile of wood chips under a tree. The road curved, and there it was, the tower rising through fog like a skeleton of iron, stairs twisting into gray. The light was real. A lantern hung about halfway up the tower, glowing a dull orange through the mist. I called out, "Forest Service, anyone up there?" No answer. Only the creak of metal and the sound of wind moving through hollow bolts. I started up the stairs. The metal groaned under my boots, flakes of rust catching in my sleeves. Halfway up, I froze. Someone was humming. It came from above, low, tuneless, almost like someone working. The kind of sound people make when they don't know they're being heard. I called again, louder. The humming stopped instantly. The silence that followed was heavy. I took another step, and the lantern above swung once, sharply, as if someone had yanked it sideways. The hook it hung on screeched against the frame. Then the light went out. I stood there in darkness, the stairs disappearing into fog both above and below. That's when I heard movement, slow, deliberate steps descending from above me, metal shifting, groaning under weight that wasn't mine. I backed down one stair. The steps kept coming, measured and certain. Whoever it was didn't rush. They were just walking down. I started talking again. "Hey, I'm with the service. You're not supposed to..." But the words died in my throat because the sound stopped directly above me. Close enough I could feel vibration through the railing. Then, nothing. I didn't wait to see who it was. I backed down the stairs fast, nearly slipping twice, boots clanging off the metal. When I hit the ground, I aimed my flashlight upward. The lantern was hanging again, swinging slowly, its light back on. but the stairs above it were empty. I left. I told myself I'd radio it in when I got signal, but by the time I reached camp, I'd convinced myself it was just nerves. Maybe the wind, maybe old metal saddling. 2 days later, a ranger came by to check the trail conditions. I mentioned the tower, casual-like, asked if anyone was using it for storage or research. He gave me a look I still remember. "That tower?" he said. "We welded the door shut 10 years ago. The top platforms collapsed. Nobody's supposed to go up there." I told him about the lantern, the humming, the steps. He shook his head and said, "You probably heard echo down the valley. Sound does weird things in that fog." Maybe he was right. But last month, during a prescribed burn near the same ridge, one of the crews radioed in about a light on the tower. They asked if anyone was stationed there for night watch. Command told them, no, the tower wasn't even on the map anymore. They said the light stayed on all night, flickering, steady, like someone sitting up there watching the forest breathe. I haven't gone back, but sometimes when I drive through that stretch at dusk, I can still see a faint glow through the trees, right where the tower should be. And even though I know better, I always turn the radio down and listen just in case I hear humming.
I hiked the Smokies that spring because I needed the noise in my head to get drowned out by something bigger. Wind, birds, trees, anything that wasn't memory. The trail was a simple loop, 7 miles up to an overlook, all switchbacks and steady climbs. The weather had just started to turn warm. Patches of fog drifted through the trees, and the air smelled like wet bark. It was quiet in that heavy, pited way you only get deep in the mountains. Every few minutes, I'd say something out loud just to hear it. Keep going. Halfway there. My voice bounced back, soft and bent, like the hills were holding on to it. I had the usual gear, light pack, 2 bottles of water, protein bar, a small handgun tucked in the side pouch. Habit, not paranoia. I've been hiking alone for years. Around mile 3, the trail cut along a narrow shelf that wrapped the ridge. You could look down and see layers of forest dropping away into mist. I stopped to drink, leaning against the wet trunk, when I heard it. My name, Evan. It came from below the trail. Not shouted, not whispered, just spoken, clear and sure. I froze, waiting for another voice, maybe laughter, maybe an explanation. Nothing. Just a small drip of water from the trees. I called back. "Hello?" My own voice came back a beat later, warped by the hollow below. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Maybe it was a trick of sound, a bird, something. But when I turned to start up the next switchback, I heard it again. Same voice, same tone, my name, Evan. This time it came from the same spot, exactly below the bend. I tried to reason through it. Maybe another hiker who knew me. Maybe someone calling for someone else whose name sounded like mine. Still, my skin crawled. When I reached the next curve, I decided to test it. I stood there, breathing the cool air, and said softly, "Hello." The echo came back a few seconds later. Only it wasn't an echo. It was my voice, clear as if played through a recorder, repeating the same word in the same tone. Then it said something else. Evan. I hadn't spoken that time. forest went very still. Even the wind seemed to pause, like the world was listening. I tried to tell myself it was acoustics, echoes bouncing between ridges, but the sound was too close now, too exact. And when I stepped toward the edge of the trail, it came again, from directly below. Evan. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was my voice, calm and measured, coming from somewhere it shouldn't be. I crouched, peering through the laurel and fern. The slope fell away steeply, tangled and green, mist shifted between trunks. I thought I saw movement, the shadows sliding between trees, tall and upright, but it could have been the fog. "Who's there?" I called, louder this time. The woods answered with silence, then softly, my own words repeated back to me. "Who's there?" It was perfect. The same inflection, the same breath on the last word. Something snapped, a dry twig underfoot, and that was enough. I backed away, careful not to trip, and started down the trail. My heart thudded, but I didn't run. Running felt like an invitation. I didn't hear the voice again until I hit the third switchback from the bottom. Then, faint through the trees, almost affectionate, "Wait." I kept walking. The parking lot was empty when I reached it. I sat in my car for a long time, hands on the wheel, listening to the wind through the cracked windows. Later that week, I told a ranger about the echo. I kept my voice light, like I wasn't asking for reassurance. He nodded slowly and said, "That stretch plays tricks on people. The valley shape makes echoes sound real close. Happens all the time." I wanted to believe him. But that night, I checked the hiking app I'd been running. It logs distance and pauses automatically. There was a 10-minute gap near that switchback. 10 minutes where I'd stopped moving. I remember standing there for maybe 2, 3 at most. Now, whenever I dream about that trail, it's always dusk. The fog never lifts, and somewhere down the switchback below, a voice keeps calling my name. Patient, familiar, and always a half a step ahead of me. And it always sounds exactly like me.
I chose Crater Lake because it's the kind of place that answers everything with cold and light. I wanted night sky shots. The rim is high, the air is thin, and the stars look honest there. It was early autumn. The days still caught a little sun, but nights dropped quickly. I drove in late, hiked a mile to a backcountry site just below the rim, and set up where the wind would be blocked by a stand of scraggly pines. My pack was the usual: camera, tripod, headlamp, freeze-dried dinner, and a small pistol stowed in an internal pocket out of habit. Not because I expected trouble, but because solitude makes you tidy about precautions. The first night was everything I wanted. The sky opened like a black bowl, and the Milky Way lay across it, a pale river. I sat with a thermos, did a few long exposures, checked the back of the camera for the way the stars trailed, and then crawled into my tent, feeling both small and safe. The wind from the lake made a slow, low sound over the trees, a constant, patient thing. I zipped up, set a low battery on my headlamp for a glow if I needed it, and dozed with the kind of half-sleep you get when something big and regular is out there keeping time. Around midnight, I awoke to a subtle change. The air felt thinner, and sound had a hollow, close quality to it. I heard it first as a faint rhythm against the background of the wind, a steady crunching like boots on dry pine needles. I lay still and listened. Animals make noise, but this step had a human cadence to it, deliberate, walking slow enough to be patient. I told myself it was a deer or a fox moving through the brush and tried to sleep again. A minute later, I heard something that didn't fit with the animal theory. It was a quiet metallic whisper, a small, precise sound that I recognized before I understood why, the gentle glide of a zipper. It was a sound I knew well from packing gear and breaking camp. Smooth, deliberate, close to the earth. The zipper sound repeated, paused, repeated once more. Now I was sitting up in the dark, heart picking up like an engine warming. I turned on my headlamp and unzipped the tent only enough to peek out. My lamp beam fanned across the immediate sight. The cooking area looked undisturbed, the tripod still where I'd left it, my footprints the only tracks in the sparse, needle-strewn soil. Beyond that, trees stood blurred by moon silver. There was no movement. The sound of the zipper had stopped, as if someone had listened and decided not to make more noise. I called out softly, more to give a shape to my own fear than to expect an answer. "Hello? Anyone there?" The woods answered with the simple, slow hush of night. I went back inside and zipped the tent closed with more care. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, a raccoon in a pack, a branch clinking against a bag. I pulled the pistol closer in instinct. There's a comfort to holding something you can trust to be simple and heavy when other parts of the world are uncertain. At about 3 in the morning, I awoke cold. The wind had died, and the air was a flat, hard thing. When I clicked on my headlamp, the zipper of the inner tent made a small, offended noise in the silence. I expected to find nothing but the familiar view of my own sleeping pad and the dim shape of the tent walls. Instead, the light from my lamp landed on something that froze all the little muscles in my face. There was a sleeping bag outside the tent, lying parallel to the tent flap, maybe 2 feet from the zipper. It was zipped closed, clean enough that dew formed in soft beads on the fabric. The bag looked as if someone had laid it down with care. The hood tucked neat, the seams straight. The light from my lamp made the shell gleam slightly, outlining a rounded, zipped silhouette. For a second, I thought someone had just set up camp beside me and gone inside another tent. For another second, I thought perhaps I'd miscounted my gear and that it had been there earlier all along. But I knew exactly what I'd brought and how I'd set things up. There had been no second bag. I chose Crater Lake because it's the kind of place that answers everything with cold and light. I wanted night sky shots. The rim is high, the air is thin, and the stars look honest there. It was early autumn. The days still caught a little sun, but nights dropped quickly. I drove in late, hiked a mile to a backcountry site just below the rim, and set up where the wind would be blocked by a stand of scraggly pines. My pack was the usual: camera, tripod, headlamp, freeze-dried dinner, and a small pistol stowed in an internal pocket out of habit, not because I expected trouble, but because solitude makes you tidy about precautions. The first night was everything I wanted. The sky opened like a black bowl, and the Milky Way lay across it, a pale river. I sat with a thermos, did a few long exposures, checked the back of the camera for the way the stars trailed, and then crawled into my tent, feeling both small and safe. The wind from the lake made a slow, low sound over the trees, a constant, patient thing. I zipped up, set a low battery on my headlamp for a glow if I needed it, and dozed with the kind of half-sleep you get when something big and regular is out there keeping time. Around midnight, I awoke to a subtle change. The air felt thinner, and sound had a hollow, close quality to it. I heard it first as a faint rhythm against the background of the wind, a steady crunching like boots on dry pine needles. I lay still and listened. Animals make noise, but this step had a human cadence to it, deliberate, walking slow enough to be patient. I told myself it was a deer or a fox moving through the brush and tried to sleep again. A minute later, I heard something that didn't fit with the animal theory. It was a quiet, metallic whisper, a small, precise sound that I recognized before I understood why, the gentle glide of a zipper. It was a sound I knew well from packing gear and breaking camp. Smooth, deliberate, close to the earth. The zipper sound repeated, paused, repeated once more. Now I was sitting up in the dark, heart picking up like an engine warming. I turned on my headlamp and unzipped the tent only enough to peek out. My lamp beam fanned across the immediate sight. The cooking area looked undisturbed, the tripod still where I'd left it, my footprints the only tracks in the sparse, needle-strewn soil. Beyond that, trees stood blurred by moon silver. There was no movement. The sound of the zipper had stopped, as if someone had listened and decided not to make more noise. I called out softly, more to give a shape to my own fear than to expect an answer. "Hello? Anyone there?" The woods answered with the simple, slow hush of night. I went back inside and zipped the tent closed with more care. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, a raccoon in a pack, a branch clinking against a bag. I pulled the pistol closer in instinct. There's a comfort to holding something you can trust to be simple and heavy when other parts of the world are uncertain. At about 3 in the morning, I awoke cold. The wind had died, and the air was a flat, hard thing. When I clicked on my headlamp, the zipper of the inner tent made a small, offended noise in the silence. I expected to find nothing but the familiar view of my own sleeping pad and the dim shape of the tent walls. Instead, the light from my lamp landed on something that froze all the little muscles in my face. There was a sleeping bag outside the tent, lying parallel to the tent flap, maybe 2 feet from the zipper. It was zipped closed, clean enough that dew formed in soft beads on the fabric. The bag looked as if someone had laid it down with care. The hood tucked neat, the seams straight. The light from my lamp made the shell gleam slightly, outlining a rounded, zipped silhouette. For a second, I thought someone had just set up camp beside me and gone inside another tent. For another second, I thought perhaps I'd miscounted my gear and that it had been there earlier all along. But I knew exactly what I'd brought and how I'd set things up. There had been no second bag. I've hunted the same stretch of Montana forest for 15 years. It's not marked on any map you buy in town. Just a long service road, a faded gate, and miles of lodgepole pines. I go alone most years. Early frost, quiet mornings, and no one to talk over the sound of wind. I like it that way. I keep things simple. Small tent, folding chair, coffee tin, my rifle, and a sidearm tucked where it always sits. The truck stays parked by the tree line, and I hike a few miles out before sunrise. Set trail cameras, check prints, follow tracks. It's routine. That November, the cold came early. The ground was already stiff, needles frozen into the dirt. I remember that because the first morning I noticed boot prints beside my truck, not mine. The tread was smaller, lighter. Maybe another hunter using the same pullout. No big deal. I shrugged it off. The day went as usual. I saw elk sign, a few deer, and set 3 cameras. One along the game trail, another by a salt lick, and one near my camp facing the truck. Habit. Those little cameras catch more truth than memory does. That night, wind worked through the trees and the frost settled. I woke once around 2 to the sound of movement. Soft, deliberate. Not a bear, not that heavy. It stopped when I unzipped the tent a few inches and aimed my light. Only steam from my breath in the beam. I told myself it was nothing and went back to sleep. Next morning, I checked the cameras. Mostly normal. Elk, a coyote, nothing new. But one clip from the camp camera made my stomach dip. Timestamp, 2:43 a.m. The frame showed my tent and truck under faint moonlight. At the far edge, between 2 trees, stood a shape. Tall, upright, motionless, just a little darker than the night behind it. It wasn't close, maybe 30 yards out, but it had weight. I played it again, thinking maybe a trick of wind or a branch caught the flash wrong. The shape didn't move. The frame ended. I told myself it was nothing. Compression glitch, lighting. But I left the camera running again anyway. That night, the temperature dropped hard. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the soft crack of ice breaking under a boot. Not far. The steps circled slow, 3 or 4 paces, stopped, then again. I called out, "You're in my camp, buddy." Silence. I chambered around just loud enough to make a point, waited, and heard the steps fade into the timber. Morning came gray and thin. I pulled the camera card before coffee, hands half numb. When I opened the files, my gut tightened. There it was again. Same camera, same angle. 2:46 a.m. this time. The figure was closer now, just at the edge of the clearing, half behind a tree. The flash had caught one shoulder and an arm. The skin looked pale, almost too smooth for a person. You could make out a faint curve of cheek where the head turned slightly toward the lens. I told myself it was just another hunter, but the forest had been silent for days. No tire marks, no voices, nothing. I packed my rifle and walked the perimeter anyway. Found nothing. But 100 feet behind the tree where the shape had stood, I found something small. A cigarette butt pressed flat into the soil, half burnt down. No smell, no ash scattered by the wind, like it had been put out gently. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound felt shaped. At one point, I heard a soft thud near the tent and thought irrationally about the way the head had been turned, like it knew where the camera was. The next day,
I checked the other cameras, hoping for something normal. 2 had pictures of elk. The third, the one I'd set along my hike out, had one odd frame from daylight. Me walking the trail, and behind me, just barely visible through the trees, another figure, blurred by motion, maybe 30 yards back, keeping pace. I never heard a thing. By then, it stopped being about hunting. I packed up, tossed gear into the truck, and left. Back home, a week later, I finally went through all the files on my computer. I should have deleted them. I know that now. But curiosity gets mean when you're alone. I slowed through the last clip the camp camera recorded. The timestamp read 5:18 a.m., about an hour before I'd gotten up. The shot showed my tent and truck from 20 feet away. My tent, my truck, dawn just starting to smear light between trees. Then, from the right edge, a figure stepped into frame. Slow, calm, steady. It walked right up to the tent, crouched down, and leaned close to the lens. For a single second, the flash caught its face. The image froze that way when I paused it. Eyes wide, skin pale from the camera's burst, mouth slightly open like it had just breathed against the lens. I stared at it for a long time before realizing what felt wrong. The figure was wearing my jacket, the same olive shell I'd had on the day before, same tear on the cuff. I didn't move for a while, just listened to the refrigerator hum, the quiet of my own house pressing in. Eventually, I shut the laptop and didn't open it again for weeks. I still go hunting, still check my cameras before every trip, but I don't mount them near camp anymore. Out there, in the dark, I'd rather not know what's standing just outside the frame, or what's wearing my clothes, waiting for the flash.